Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Jamie, and in this video we're talking about the Ionic for alert. And we're going to do a bunch of examples showing you guys how to open just your basic alert right here with a title and a subtitle and a message and an OK button. And then a bunch of different examples all the way down to even being able to open an alert to pop open some checkboxes, get the user to specify their preferences or whatever, what have you. Yeah, so basically the alert is used to collect information from the user. If you want a more advanced modal looking thing, then I recommend using the Ionic modal. I'll have a video on that in the future. I'll just leave an annotation up there. But this is just for collecting basic information using either like just having them press a button in an alert like this, okay, or even prompting them for information like text, specifying a date and stuff like that. So we're going to be covering all that in this video, and let's get started. Alright, so I just have my own blank project right here. It's an Ionic 4 project. If you don't have your own project, be sure to check out my video on getting started in Ionic, and then we'll get you set up with your own project. But assuming you've got your own project, let's get started here, start writing some code. So I'm just going to make a button right here, an ion button, so that when we press it, it's going to call a function called present alert. Okay, and that's just how we're going to do these examples, just a bunch of different buttons that open up a bunch of different type of alerts. And so this first one is going to call a function called present alert. Okay, and that's going to be declared inside of the TypeScript. So inside of the corresponding TypeScript file, I'm first going to import the alert controller up here from Ionic Angular. And then I'm going to inject the alert controller dependency like this into the constructor. Okay, and then this will just allow us to use this dependency in our function. So I'm going to make the very first function right here. It kind of looks like a lot of code, but you really don't need most of it. The only thing you really need is to declare that alert and then call present. But I have some other stuff just to increase our understanding of the alert. So let's start off up here. This is just a function and it has async at the start of it, and that just signifies that we're able to use keywords in here like await, and that will just kind of make our life a little bit easier. So that's all the async is saying. And then so we create the alert right here. That's what this first part is doing. So we make a variable alert and we set that equal to the result of waiting for that dependency which we just installed right here, or just injected into the constructor. We wait for that to create the modal, which we specify right here inside of this JSON object. So when we're creating the modal, we can pass in a bunch of different things. The very most important thing is going to be the header right here. So the header for this one is just going to be called alert. And then you can also give it a subheader. So we're going to see what all of these look like in the actual alert in just a second. So we've got a header and a subheader, and then a message. That's like another one of the key things which you can have. And then buttons. So this one only has one button. The buttons are specified in an array as strings. This is like the easiest way to do it. We're going to look at more complex examples in a second. So yeah, basically we just have header, subheader, message, and an OK button. And then once we grab the alert which we've created using the create method, then so that's stored inside of the alert variable. Then we're going to call present on that alert, so alert.present. Okay, and then that will present the alert to the user, as you might expect. So let's save that, and then again, this present alert is just called inside of this button. Whenever we click the button, rather, it calls present alert. So let's go and check that out on our site. So here's our button right here, and when we click it, we can see there's the title. The title is alert, so it's alert and then subtitle and then the message. So let's go and check that against our configuration. Alert, subtitle, and message. Alert, subtitle, and message. And then there's our OK button right there. Alright, let's move on to the next example. So the next example that we're going to do is we're going to have an alert with multiple buttons instead of just a single OK button. Okay, so I've just declared the same exact thing here, another button, but this time it's going to call a function called present alert with multiple buttons. Alright, and then I'm going to save that and hop over to the TypeScript where I'm going to declare that next function. So here's the next function, present alert, multiple buttons. Okay, and we just do exactly the same thing. Literally everything is the same here except for this buttons right here. This is just has more buttons inside of it. Now the buttons are in order from left to right on the page. So like cancel will be the leftmost button and delete will be the rightmost button. Okay, and the rightmost button will be considered as like the primary button. And so you'll see what I mean in a second. It'll just be kind of styled more boldly. So yeah, basically all that changed was the buttons. Now let's hop over and see what that looks like. So there's our button right there, and when we click it, we see everything's exactly the same except for now we have these 3 buttons right here. Now, since these buttons take up more than the alert's width, they've actually been stacked vertically instead of horizontally. But normally if you only have like 2 buttons, they will be stacked horizontally and it will look a little bit better. Okay, the next example is we're just going to have a little confirm dialog. This is like a common use case, is like a confirmation dialog. Like, do you want to log out or something like that? So this one's same thing, just going to call a method called present alert confirm. And then inside of the TypeScript, we're going to declare that method right here. It's a little bit longer this time. Not super long, but about this long. So here it is, and the header for this one is going to be confirm. Okay, and these are optional, by the way. You don't need the header and the message. In fact, in this one, the subheader has been left out. So this one does not even have a subheader. It just has a header and a message. Okay, and the message can include some basic HTML styling. So like right here, we're using the strong tag in order to present this text right here as part of the message as bold. So that'll be a bold tag inside of the message. So we'll see what that looks like. Let's check it out right now, actually, before we go and look at the other stuff. So the confirm, that text right there, like I was saying, it is bold. Okay, this one is a lot more simple. Okay, and then the other stuff that we have going on here is the buttons is, instead of them being just strings like normal, like in the previous example they were all just strings. Well, if you want more custom behavior for your buttons, you've got to declare them more fully like this. Like for each button, we declare it as an object still inside of this array. And for this first object right here, we just have the text of the button is cancel, and then the role of this button is cancel. And when you specify the role of a button as cancel, then that means that if the user clicks the backdrop, like if they click anywhere that's not modal in order to try and close it, that means it will call the very first button which has the role of cancel. Okay, so like there's a handler right here which handles what happens when the user clicks the cancel button. So what I'm saying is that when you click the backdrop and the role is set to cancel, that means that this function will still be called even though they didn't technically click the cancel button. Okay, also what's going on here is we are setting the CSS class of the button. So if we go and check that out once again, if we inspect this button right here, we can see that the secondary class is applied right here. So that's a way that you can put a class on your button in order to style it. And so if we wanted to style like all elements with the secondary class on them, we could do that in some way like this. Now there are a couple caveats to this. One is that we're inside of the global.scss, and we had to put it here because the alert is not a part of the home module, like the home page, which we're normally writing our our SCSS inside of. That's our styling code for the home page. The alert is a global element, and so you have to select for the class name right here inside of the global.scss, otherwise it's not going to work. The other caveat I noticed is that Ionic seems to already want to put a color on those buttons, and so I had to use important in order to style it a certain way. And then the third caveat is that the secondary class is kind of a confusing class name because Ionic already has a color scheme file, variables.scss, which has a color in here called secondary. But the example which I'm using is just from their site. I probably should have modified it, but I think you guys get the point. Basically, this CSS will work, but it's just kind of, you probably want to use a different name, and just remember to put it in the global.scss. And you're probably going to have to make it pound important. That's how you just make your CSS override other CSS. Otherwise, for me, I could not get it to work. So, but I will show you that this does work. So if you click confirm, then you can see here the cancel button is red. So a lot of caveats to that, but just showing you how you can use that particular CSS class in order to do some styling. Okay. So with that out of the way, just talking about this same alert right here, we're talking about these functions right here, the handlers. This is like one of the key things about alerts. So the handlers are what happen when you click the button. Alright, and this one just logs confirm, cancel, blah, and then the OK button logs out confirm, OK. Okay, so let's try testing those out. So I'll click cancel, and then it logs confirm, cancel, blah. Alright, and I'm going to clear the console, and then press confirm again, and I'm going to click the backdrop, and because the role was configured as cancel, it is still going to call this function right here. Okay, so I'm going to click the backdrop, and it still logs out confirm, cancel. Okay, so that's just an interesting behavior of the Ionic alert, is that if the role is canceled, it will still call this function right here if you click the backdrop. Alright, and then the OK button worked as well with the confirm OK. Okay, now let's look at the next example. So the next example is where we're actually going to prompt the user for some information. Okay, so this one is just going to call a function called present alert prompt. Okay, save that, and then pop over to the TypeScript and declare that function. So we just create the alert as normal, and then we have a header. And then this time, exciting, we get some inputs we get to work with. So there are just a whole bunch of inputs to collect information from the user. And then once the user fills out that information, it'll be handled by our application. I'll show you how we can do that in just a second. So like if we ask them for like their name and stuff, maybe we could save it to a database or whatever you really want to do. We're just going to console log it out. So the inputs are structured like this. They have a name, okay, and this is going to refer to, like this is going to be the key in the data object that we get back. So like if they fill out the name field, the data object will have a key of name, and then the value will be whatever they put inside of the input. Before we go any further, I just want to show you that particular part. And so when we press the prompt button, we see we have all these inputs in here. So the first one has a placeholder of placeholder 1. Okay, and that's where this gray text is coming from right there, placeholder 1. Alright, and then the type of the input field is a text input. There are many different types. There's like a checkbox, a radio button, just a whole bunch of different types. When you're specifying the type of the input, they all have to be the same. So like you can't have one be a checkbox and one be a text input. It's either all checkboxes or all text. And by the way, you can, like there are different types of text. Like one of these is a URL type. So like down here, this one is asking for a URL. That still counts as text. So as long as it's still like text-like, even like a date is kind of like that. Like here we've got a date selector. As long as they are text-like, then you can still do it. Okay, so the first one just has the name of name1, type of text. And then the second example actually has another field on it. It has an ID. And what the ID does is that on side of this input right here, it just puts the ID property on the input itself. So if you're wanting to do that, that's how you would do it. We don't really need that for our example. It's just for illustration purposes. And then here, importantly, we have the value of hello. So that's why it was pre-populated with hello. That's kind of how you can pre-populate the thing. And if we delete it, it will have the placeholder there of placeholder 2, because that's what we specified right here as the placeholder. Alright, third one is pretty much exactly the same, except for the type is of URL, like I was saying. And so in here, it just wants us to put a URL, and these inputs work with your like standard min and max values for an HTML input. If you want to know more about HTML inputs, which is what this whole system is modeled after, I recommend going to this Mozilla website right here. I'll leave a link in the description to this, but basically this just talks about like all the different things that you can have on your input, like the different attributes. We've got like min and maximum length, pattern, etc. I'm not sure if all of these work with the input, but I know a lot of them do. So for example, on here we see it talking about the type. It can be a date, URL, email. So most of those should work with these as well. Ionic has just kind of shoved them all into this alert, so you can have a bunch of default functionality by simply specifying the type right here. So the type is URL for the third one, type is date for the fourth one, and then there's like a minimum and maximum date set right here. Alright, and I have noticed that this date picker is a little bit limited. Like, it says that the maximum date is going to be 2018, sometime in 2018, and that is somewhat true. Like, if I click this drop down right here, then it won't let me go past January 2018, but I can go back 2017 all the way to the minimum. However, I can like manually specify a custom date that's outside of that range. Like I can specify 2020 and it won't really get mad at me. So it's just kind of limited. Here I'll show you like how we handle the result. So remember down here at the bottom when we call present and then we await on the result of ondid dismiss. So basically the alert has been submitted and we have all the data. Well, we're just console.logging it, so now we can talk about that. So this is the result object printed right here, and it has two fields in it. One is data, and the other is role. Okay, and the role is like the type of button that was pressed. The button that we pressed, I think that was the OK button. It didn't have a role, and so the role was undefined. However, if we did the prompt again and we pressed cancel, then you can see here that the role says cancel for this next item right here. And so the actual data contains a values map, which is just basically a JSON object with the keys of all of the inputs which we had. So all of these guys right here, when we were naming these inputs, these are the names of the keys of the data. And so if you needed to get a specific value from the inputs that the user typed in, you could just say data.values.name1, and that would give you the value as a string. So that's how you could get any of these particular values, or you could just grab them all at the same time and save them to a database. Whatever you want to do, I'm just showing you that the data exists right here with an object that contains a values key with all the different values in a JSON object corresponding to the values the user typed in, with the appropriate key as the name and the input field. So hopefully that made sense. I tried to say it like 5 different ways just so that it made sense. The key is the name and the value is what the user typed in. Alright, let's move on to the next example. Okay, so this one is going to be about radio buttons basically. So we just did input fields like text input fields. Now let's do radio input fields. So that's just another type of input field you'll see here in a second. Alright, so radio buttons are a little bit different than the last example. The first part is the same. We just create an alert and then we give it a header. And then here inside of the inputs, the name isn't really used in the same way that it was in the last one. it's not the key in the values. With radio buttons, only one of them can be checked at a time. So I'll just show you, it'll be easier. So I'll just save that, and then here when I click on radio, you'll see what I mean, like only one of them can be selected. If you want multiple selections, then we're going to be looking at a checkbox example in a second. That's what that's for, but radio buttons, only one of them can be selected. And so like if I choose radio button number 1 here and press OK, you'll see that the data contains values, which refers to a string, which is the value field right here. So value of value 1, that's the first one. Values is equal to value 1 as a string. So it's kind of a little bit funky in my opinion if you're using radio buttons. That's just what it's going to do. The name isn't really used as far as the result goes, like the data. The name itself doesn't seem to be used, so when you're doing the radio buttons, all you really got to check is the value. Just provide a value here which is corresponding to what you want the value to be if they select it. Like what is displayed right here, value 1. That's value 1, that's right here. You can just ignore the name, and I'm pretty sure you don't even need to provide that. It was just in their example that they gave us. And then the label here, that is for what is shown inside of the radio button. Okay, and then the checked right here, that is whether or not it is checked by default. So like if I pop it open, this one is the first one selected, whereas if I removed that, then it would not be selected. And that's basically it for the radio button. Everything else is almost exactly the same. Alright, now let's look at a checkbox example. So this is for if you want multiple selection options, not just one. So we'll save that and then hop over to the TypeScript and do the checkbox example. And so with the checkbox, it's basically exactly the same as the radio button. Let's just go and check out how the result looks when we check certain items. So if I check 1 and 3, so I can do multiple in this one, and press OK, the data here contains the values as an actual array. Now this makes more sense in my mind. This is kind of what I was picturing when it says values right here. Like the old, with the radio button, it still said values, but it just gave us a single string. But this one is actually an array, and so this one has the strings value 1 and value 3 inside of it, because those are the ones that were checked. Okay, and if we don't have any of them checked, then it is just going to give us back an empty array. Okay, simple as that. Alright, so down here when we get the results, we can just do whatever we want with, I think it's result.data.values. That will be, if we wanted to log just that, we could do that, result.data.values. That's how we could get the actual values corresponding to what the user checked. Alright, and that does it for like different input field types. And then there are some other options for configuring, like if you want it to be animated, or if you want the backdrop to dismiss the alert if it is clicked by the user or not. And I'll just briefly go over them, but I'm not going to do an example for each one. So like in the very first example, if we wanted this alert, just the plain old OK one, if we wanted this one to not allow dismissing through the backdrop, we could just say backdrop dismiss is false. Okay, so it just goes right in here at the same level as the header and so forth, as a part of this JSON object when we're configuring it. And so if we do that and then go and check out the basic alert, we'll see that now when we click the backdrop, it does not dismiss the alert. Okay, so I'm just going to remove that. That was just for illustration. So there's a boolean for if you want it to be animated when it shows up, if you want the backdrop to dismiss. We already covered the buttons. We already covered the CSS class. Here you can configure a specific animation to use when the alert is presented. That's kind of more advanced. I'm not really going to cover that. We already talked about the header, the inputs, and then there's a boolean for whether or not you want the keyboard to be automatically dismissed when the overlay is presented. Alright, so all that's pretty straightforward. And then there's a leave animation you can specify as well. We already covered the message, and then you can also specify if you want to default to the iOS or Android styling. okay, because by default it's going to change depending on the platform that you're on. We already covered the subheader, and then this last one is just if you specify translucent as true, the alert is just slightly see-through, and that's it. Alright, and there we go, you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. It was kind of a long one. I'm a little bit tired now. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll answer them a different day, not today. And be sure, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. And with that said, leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.